For 30 years. They told me I was an orphan lucky to have a bunk bed. Then, after a freezing shift paying $9 an hour, a vintage Cadillac pulled up. The driver said he was my grandfather and that my family had been billing me like a business expense. Inside his envelope were photos of fundraisers using my face. Turns out, the orphan they sold in every brochure is the only person who can fire them, provided I keep clocking in. My name is Elise Ramirez, and for the last decade, my life has been measured in blocks of $9 an hour. I am 30 years old, and I possess nothing that cannot be packed into 2 cardboard boxes within 20 minutes. Tonight, like every other night for the past 5 months, I was standing behind the scratched plexiglass counter of the Starlight 24 in Hollow Creek, Wyoming. The air conditioner was broken again, stuck on a setting that felt less like climate control and more like a direct line to the Arctic Circle. But the smell was the same as always. It was a cocktail of stale coffee, floor cleaner that smelled like artificial pine, and the distinct, oily scent of gasoline that drifted in every time the sliding doors rattled open. It was 3 a.m. This is the hour when the highway goes quiet, and the only people awake in a town like Hollow Creek are the truckers, the insomniacs, and the people who made bad life choices, or in my case, people who had no choices to make. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful electronic sound that clashed violently with the reality of the man stumbling through the entrance. He was a regular, a local drifter whose name I think was Carl, though he never offered it, and I never asked. He wore a grease-stained Carhartt jacket and smelled like he had been marinating in cheap bourbon since noon. He made a beeline for the hot food roller grill, his movements swaying and unpredictable, like a ship in a gale. I watched him with the dull, heavy-lidded detachment that comes from working the graveyard shift. He grabbed a jalapeno hot dog that had been spinning there since my shift started at 10, tore the wrapper open before he even reached the counter, and took a bite. Then he stopped. He spat the chunk of meat onto the linoleum floor. "This is garbage," Carl slurred, slamming the half-eaten hot dog onto the counter. Mustard splattered across the lottery ticket display. "It is cold. You selling me cold food, girl?" "It is on the warmer, sir," I said, my voice flat. I reached for a rag to wipe up the mustard. "If you do not want it, that is fine. But you opened it." "I am not paying for cold trash," he shouted. His voice cracked, loud and sudden in the empty store. "You think because I am drinking I do not know quality. I want a refund, and I want a fresh one." "You have not paid for it yet, so there is no refund," I explained, trying to keep my eyes on the register screen. And that was the last one. "Manager," he yelled, slamming his fist on the counter. The plastic display of lighters rattled. "Get the manager out here." I closed my eyes for a second. I knew Doug was in the back office, probably watching Netflix on his phone. But the second he heard a voice raised, he would smell blood. Doug Miller was a small man with a mustache that never quite filled in and a desperate need to feel important. He did not view customer complaints as problems to be solved. He viewed them as opportunities to perform. The back door swung open. Doug marched out, adjusting his name tag, which sat crookedly on his polyester polo shirt. He looked at Carl, then at the splattered mustard, and finally, with a sneer of satisfaction, at me. "What is the problem here?" "Elise?" Doug asked. He did not look at the customer. He stared straight at me, speaking loud enough for the security camera above the cigarette rack to pick up the audio. "Gentleman says the hot dog was cold," I said. He threw it on the counter. Doug picked up the rejected food with 2 fingers, grimacing theatrically. He touched the casing. "It is stone cold. Elise, did you check the temperature logs at midnight like I told you?" I did. I lied. I had been mopping a slushy explosion at midnight because he had told me to prioritize the floor. "Do not lie to me," Doug snapped. He turned to Carl, his face transforming instantly into a mask of oily customer service apology. "Sir, I am terribly sorry. My employee here has difficulties following basic protocol. Please, take a bag of jerky on the house. On us." Carl grunted, satisfied with his victory, grabbed a $12 bag of beef jerky, and stumbled out into the night without paying a dime. I watched him go, feeling the familiar heat rising in my chest. It was not anger anymore. Anger takes energy. This was just a toxic, low-level radiation of humiliation. Doug turned back to me. He leaned over the counter, lowering his voice. That was a $12 loss. Elise, plus the $2 for the hot dog. That is $14. The warmer is broken. Doug, I said, my hands gripping the rag tight. You know it is. The coil has been out since Tuesday. The warmer works fine when I work the morning shift, he said, smiling that tight, nasty little smile. This is shrinkage, and shrinkage comes out of the till, or it comes out of the person responsible for the till. He opened the register drawer with his key, tapped a few buttons to log a shortage, and then looked at me expectantly. You can pay it now, or I can write you up for negligence. 3 write-ups, and you are terminated. You are sitting on 2 already. Are you not? I stared at him. $14. That was more than an hour and a half of my life. That was a week of ramen noodles. That was the difference between putting gas in my car or praying the light on the dashboard was lying. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my tips from the jar, a pathetic crumble of singles and quarters. I counted out $14. It was everything I had made in tips for 3 nights. I placed the money on the counter. Put it in the drawer, Doug commanded, and clean up that mustard. You look sloppy. He went back to his office. I stood there alone in the humming silence of the store, wiping yellow stains off the counter, feeling like a piece of machinery that was slowly grinding its gears into dust. I was not a person to them. I was a business expense they resented paying. When 6 a.m. finally arrived, the sun had not yet risen. The sky was a bruised purple over the mountains to the west. My relief, a teenager named Kyle, who was always 10 minutes late, finally shuffled in, headphones on, barely acknowledging my existence. I clocked out. 9 hours, $81, minus taxes, minus the $14 Doug had extorted from me. I walked out the sliding doors into the biting cold of the Wyoming morning. The wind in Hollow Creek cuts right through you. It carries the chill from the mountains and mixes it with the grit of the coal trains. I pulled my thin denim jacket tighter around myself, my hands shaking. It was partly the cold, but mostly it was the adrenaline of swallowed rage crashing down into exhaustion. The parking lot was bathed in the sickly, flickering glow of the sodium street lamps. The light made everything look diseased: the cracked asphalt, the overflowing dumpster, and my own reflection in the window of the store. I walked toward my car, a rusting Honda Civic that had survived 3 owners before me and sounded like a dying lawnmower. It was parked at the far edge of the lot, next to a row of mud-caked pickup trucks belonging to the miners who stopped for coffee on their way to the early shift. But as I got closer, I stopped. There was something sitting next to my car. It was so out of place that for a moment, my brain refused to process it. It was a Cadillac, but not a new one. It was a vintage model, maybe late 60s or early 70s, painted a deep, midnight blue that looked black in the shadows. It was immaculate. The chrome bumpers caught the yellow streetlights and turned them into gold. It was a tank of a car, wide and heavy and elegant, looking like it had just rolled off a showroom floor 50 years ago. There was not a speck of dust on it. The license plate was not from Wyoming. It was a custom plate, just 3 letters and 2 numbers. Simple and arrogant. A car like that did not stop at the Starlight 24. A car like that did not stop in Hollow Creek unless it had a flat tire or was lost. I gripped my keys in my pocket, creating a makeshift weapon between my knuckles, a habit from growing up in the system. Always be ready. I walked past the Cadillac to get to my door, keeping my eyes averted, but I could feel the presence inside. The driver's side window was not tinted. Sitting behind the wheel was a man. He was not looking at his phone. He was not fumbling with a map. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting at the 10 and 2 positions on the steering wheel. He had thick silver hair, swept back, and he was wearing a dark wool coat that probably cost more than my car. He looked to be about 70, maybe older, but there was nothing frail about him. He looked like a monument carved out of granite, and he was watching me. He did not blink. His eyes followed me as I stepped toward my door. It was not a predatory look, not in the way men usually looked at me in this parking lot. It was studying me, like I was a specimen in a jar, or a variable in a math equation he was trying to solve. I unlocked my car door, the mechanism screeching in the cold silence. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. I ignored the man and pulled it out, thinking it might be Doug telling me I forgot to restock the cups. It was a text message from a number I had saved as Keller House Admin. Do not forget the alumni Christmas party this Saturday. Elise, you always have a place here. We are family. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the delete button. A bitter, jagged laugh escaped my throat, turning into a cloud of vapor in the freezing air. A place. They always said I had a place. Usually. That place was a cot in the hallway because they had overbooked the rooms for a photo op, or a plastic chair in the back row while the donors ate prime rib, or a corner where I could stand and smile while they told sad stories about my tragic beginnings to get rich women to open their checkbooks. Family, I whispered to the empty air. Right. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The heavy thud of a car door closing made me spin around. The man had gotten out of the Cadillac. He was tall, imposing. He stood straight, ignoring the biting wind as if weather was something that only happened to poor people. He walked around the front of his car with a slow, deliberate gait. His shoes were polished leather, clicking rhythmically on the asphalt. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stepped back, pressing my spine against the freezing metal of my car door. I do not have any cash, I said, my voice loud, defensive. And the register is dropped in a safe. I cannot open it. The man stopped 3 feet away from me, up close. His face was a map of deep lines, but his eyes were sharp, a piercing gray that looked disturbingly familiar. He did not look like a robber. He looked like he owned the ground we were standing on. Elise Ramirez, he said. It was not a question. His voice was deep, gravelly, like rocks grinding together deep underground. I froze. Who are you? How do you know my name? He stood there, hands in the pockets of his wool coat, analyzing my face. He looked at my cheap uniform, the grease stain on my sleeve, the dark circles under my eyes. He seemed to be cataloging every failure, every hardship, every scar. I am August Northbridge, he said. The name hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The air left my lungs. Northbridge. In this part of the country, you did not just hear that name. You lived under it. Northbridge, rail and ore. The logo was on the side of every train that rumbled through town at midnight, shaking my apartment walls. It was on the gate of the massive smelting plant 3 miles east that employed half the town and poisoned the other half. It was on the wing of the hospital where the uninsured waited for 12 hours to be seen. And more personally, it was the name on the bronze plaque in the lobby of the Keller House, the Northbridge Family Foundation, the great benefactors, the saviors of the unwanted. I had grown up hearing the staff whisper that name with reverence. Mr. Northbridge paid for the new roof. The Northbridge grant covers your porridge, so be grateful. You are lying, I managed to say, though my voice trembled. Mr. Northbridge he is invisible. Nobody sees him. I have been watching, he said. His tone was devoid of warmth, devoid of the pity I was used to receiving from social workers. It was cold, hard fact. I have been watching you for a long time. Elise. He pulled one hand out of his pocket. He was holding a thick manila envelope. He did not hand it to me. He leaned forward and placed it gently on the hood of my rusting Honda, right next to a patch where the clear coat was peeling off like sunburned skin. The envelope looked heavy, expensive. I looked at it, then back at him. What do you want? If this is some PR stunt for the foundation, I am not doing photos anymore. I aged out. Find a cuter orphan. August Northbridge did not flinch. He looked at me with an intensity that made me want to shrink, but I forced myself to stand tall. I had survived the Keller House. I had survived the streets. I could survive a rich old man in a parking lot. "I am not here for a photo," he said. He took a half step closer. The smell of him reached me: expensive tobacco, old paper, and the crisp scent of snow. "They told you that you were an orphan," he said. His voice dropped an octave, becoming lethal. "They told you that your parents died in a car crash and you had nobody." "Yeah, I know the story," I snapped. "I lived it." "And they told me," August continued, overriding me, "that you died at 3 days old. Complications from a premature birth, a tragedy. They showed me a death certificate. They showed me a tiny grave." I stared at him, my mouth opening slightly, my mind struggling to process the words. "What?" He gestured toward the envelope on my hood. "Open it later. Not here. Somewhere safe." He paused, and for a split second, the granite facade cracked. I saw something behind his eyes: rage, pure, molten, ancient rage, but it was not directed at me. "Both stories," he said, looking toward the flickering lights of the gas station, where I had just spent 9 hours of my life for $80. "Benefit the same group of people, and they have been billing you to me like a business expense for 30 years. He turned around, walked back to his Cadillac, and got in. The engine purred to life, a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. He did not wave. He did not look back. He just pulled out of the lot, the big blue car gliding onto the empty highway, leaving me standing alone in the freezing cold, staring at an envelope that sat on my car like a bomb waiting to go off. I drove home with the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. My apartment was a third-floor walk-up in a building that leaned precariously close to the train tracks, shaking every time a coal freighter rumbled through town. The rent was $400 a month, which was exactly half of what I took home after taxes, leaving me with just enough to keep the lights on and buy generic peanut butter. I kicked the door shut behind me, locking all 3 deadbolts. The air inside was stale, smelling of old drywall and the neighbor's burnt cabbage. The overhead light flickered, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the room. It was a stark, depressing contrast to the interior of the Cadillac I had just seen. That car had smelled of leather and security. My apartment smelled of survival. I threw the envelope onto the laminate table that served as my dining area and desk. For a long moment, I just stared at it. August Northbridge. The name felt heavy in my mind, like a stone I had swallowed and could not digest. My hands were trembling as I finally reached for the flap. It was not sealed with spit or tape. It was closed with a wax seal that had already been broken. I turned it over and dumped the contents out. Paper slid across the cheap laminate. Photos, bank statements, legal documents. The first thing that caught my eye was a glossy brochure. I recognized the font immediately. It was the typeface used by the Keller House for their annual Gala of Hope. I had seen these pamphlets 1,000 times stacked in the director's office, but I had never really looked at them. I looked now, and I stopped breathing. There, on the cover, was a photo of a 5-year-old girl with wide, dark eyes and a smudged cheek, clutching a ragged teddy bear. It was me. I remembered that day. I remembered it because Director Rhonda Keller had taken my good coat away, the one a donor had dropped off the week before, and forced me to wear a torn sweater that was 2 sizes too big. She had rubbed dirt on my face, looked sad. "Elise," she had said, "nobody writes checks for happy children." I opened the brochure. The text under my photo read, "Elise, abandoned and alone. Found a family within our walls. Your donation of $5,000 provides a year of safety for a child just like her." I felt a bile rise in my throat. $5,000. I grabbed the next paper. It was a bank statement from the Northbridge Family Foundation. The date was 20 years ago. It showed a wire transfer. Beneficiary: the Keller House Administration. Memo: Elise Care Stipend. Annual: amount $50,000. I stared at the number. $50,000. In 1 year. I did the math in my head, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I had lived at the Keller House for 18 years. If this stipend was annual, and if it increased with inflation, which the subsequent statements in the pile confirmed, Then the foundation had paid nearly $1 million for my care. $1 million. I looked around my apartment. I looked at the cracks in the ceiling. I looked at my shoes, which were held together with superglue. I remembered the winters at the house. I remembered shivering in a bed with a blanket so thin you could read a newspaper through it. I remembered being told that we could not have seconds at dinner because the budget was extremely tight. I remembered Rhonda Keller driving a new Lexus SUV every 2 years while I was taping my sneakers. They had not just stolen from a charity, they had stolen me. I dug deeper into the pile. There were 2 documents clipped together. The first was a death certificate. It was an official state document, embossed and signed. Name Elise Northbridge. Date of death, October 14th, 1994. Cause of death, respiratory failure. Due to premature birth complications. Physician signature Dr. A. Vance, October 14th, my birthday. I turned the page. The second document was a birth certificate. This one looked older, more fragile. Name Elise Ramirez Northbridge, father Julian Northbridge, mother Elena Ramirez, date of birth, October 14th, 1994. Julian Northbridge. That was August's eldest son, the golden boy who had died in a skiing accident 2 decades ago. I had heard the stories. Everyone in town knew the tragedy of the Northbridge heir, but nobody had ever mentioned he had a daughter. The pieces began to click together, forming a picture so grotesque I wanted to scream. My mother must have been a secret. Maybe the maid. Maybe a local girl Julian fell for. She died, or was paid off. I did not know that part yet, and I was left. And then came the architects of my misery. I saw the signatures on the grant approvals. Vivian Northbridge, August's daughter, my aunt, the woman who smiled from the society pages every Sunday, wearing pearls, and talking about lifting the community, and on the receiving end, Rhonda Keller. It was a perfect ecosystem. Vivian declared me dead to her father to cut off my inheritance. Then, she moved me to the Keller house, kept my identity a secret, but used my existence to funnel money out of the foundation. I was a ghost who generated cash. I was a dead girl on one set of books and a poster orphan on the other. They had monetized my suffering. Every time I cried in a brochure, they bought a new car. Every time I went to bed hungry, they cashed a check. I felt sick, physically sick. I stood up and paced the small length of my room, clutching the papers. I wanted to burn them. I wanted to drive to the Keller house and burn it down. But then I saw the other items in the envelope. At the bottom of the pile, there was a plastic key card, the kind used for secure buildings. Next to it was an old-fashioned iron key, heavy and cold. And finally, a small, rectangular card made of thick cardstock. It had no logo, just 4 words printed in sharp, black ink. Clause 11, 4. Forgotten heir proxy. I picked it up. Underneath the card was a photocopy of a legal trust document. The header read, The Northbridge Family Trust. Governance Bylaws. I sat back down and began to read. The language was dense, full of heretofore and notwithstanding, but I had spent my life reading fine print on eviction notices and loan applications. I knew how to find the loophole. Clause 11.4. In the event that a direct lineal descendant of the founder, previously declared deceased or incapacitated, is found to be living, said descendant shall be designated a forgotten heir. I read on, my finger tracing the lines. If said forgotten heir has maintained independent residence and employment for a continuous period of no less than 6 months, without financial assistance from the trust, the foundation, or any family member, my breath hitched. Then said, heir shall be granted the founder's proxy vote in all matters regarding the trust and the foundation, overriding the board of directors, until such time as the founder revokes the privilege. I read it again, and a third time, 6 months. August had said I had been at the Starlight for 5 months and 1 week. The condition was specific. Independent residence and employment. That meant I had to pay my own rent, buy my own food, no charity, no handouts. If I had taken a single dollar from them, if I had accepted a scholarship, a gift from the foundation, or even a free room at the Keller house after I turned 18, I would have violated the clause. I realized then why my life had been so hard. It was not just cruelty, it was insurance. Vivian and Rhonda needed me to be dependent. That was why Rhonda had sabotaged my college applications, claiming they lost the paperwork. That was why, when I tried to get a job at the library, the position suddenly vanished. They needed me poor, but they also needed me in the system. They needed me to need them, but I had left 5 months ago, after a fight with Rhonda where she tried to charge me back rent for the closet I slept in. I had packed my bags and walked out. I moved into this hellhole. I got the job at Starlight. I cut them off. I thought I was running away. In reality, I had unknowingly started a countdown clock that terrified them. That was why August was here. He had been watching the clock too. I looked at the heavy iron key and the plastic access card. They were not just tools. They were weapons. This entire envelope was a bomb, and I was the detonator. I sat there for a long time as the wind howled outside, rattling the window pane. The anger that had been burning in my chest cooled into something harder, sharper. It felt like steel. For 30 years, I believed I was trash. I believed I was unwanted. I believed that the universe just naturally hated me. But it was not the universe. It was 2 women with checkbooks. My phone buzzed against the hard surface of the table. The sound made me jump. I looked at the screen. It was a number I did not recognize. I picked it up. "Hello." "They will try to buy you first," a voice said. It was August. He did not say hello. His voice sounded rougher over the phone, like tires on gravel. "Then, when money does not work," he continued, "they will try to break you. They will try to make you lose that job. They will try to make you miss rent. They will try to reset the clock." I gripped the phone tighter. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew about the money. You knew about the brochures." "I suspected," he corrected. "I only confirmed it when I saw the internal accounts last week. I stepped away from the company 10 years ago. Elise, I let Vivian run the charity because I thought she had a heart. I was wrong. She has a calculator." "Why tell me now?" I asked. "Why not yesterday? Why not 10 years ago?" "Because 10 years ago, you were a child in their custody," August said. "If I had stepped in then, they would have fought me for custody. They would have tied it up in court for a decade, and you would have been the rope in a tug of war. And more importantly, you would not have triggered the clause." "The clause," I repeated. "The forgotten heir." "It is the only way to fire them," August said. "I cannot fire the board. The trust is set up to protect them from me in my old age. They declared me semi-retired and mentally drifting 3 years ago to stop me from asking questions. My vote is symbolic now, unless I hand it to a proxy." He paused. I could hear the faint sound of a diner background noise clinking silverware, a coffee machine hissing. "If you want to know why I wrote that clause 20 years ago," he said, "and if you want to know how we are going to burn their kingdom down using their own matches, meet me at the Bluebird Diner. 6 in the morning. I will be at the back table." "And if I do not come?" I asked. There was a silence on the other end, a long, heavy silence. "Then you throw that envelope in the trash," August said softly. "You go back to the Starlight. You keep selling gas and hot dogs, and you let them keep writing your name on checks you will never cash. You continue to be the child nobody wanted, just like they wrote it." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4:15 in the morning. I looked at the death certificate with my birthday on it. I looked at the photo of me with dirt on my face. I stood up. I went to the sink and splashed cold water on my face. I grabbed my jacket. I put the key card, the iron key, and the proxy card into my pocket. I left the money statements on the table, but I took the birth certificate. I was not Elise Ramirez, the girl who owed the world an apology for existing. I was the one person who could settle the score. I walked out of the apartment, locking the door behind me. The hallway was freezing, but I did not feel the cold anymore. I walked down the stairs, out into the dark, pre-dawn streets of Hollow Creek. I got into my rusting Honda. the engine groaning as I turned the key. I turned the headlights on. They cut through the gloom, illuminating the road ahead. I was not going to work. I was going to breakfast. I did not drive straight to the Bluebird Diner. I could not. To sit across from a man who claimed to be my grandfather, a man who claimed I owned a seat at a table I had never even been allowed to clean, required more than just blind faith. It required ammunition. The address printed on the back of the white keycard led me to the outskirts of town, past the last residential street where the pavement turned cracked and gray. North Creek Storage sat adjacent to the railway line, a sprawling grid of corrugated metal units surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The sign above the gate flickered with a dying fluorescent buzz, the letters humming in the pre-dawn silence. I rolled down my window and held the card up to the reader. The machine beeped, a sharp, electronic chirp that sounded too loud in the quiet morning. The heavy iron gate shuddered and began to slide open on rusted tracks. I drove through, my tires crunching on the gravel. Unit 714 was located in the back row, hidden from the main road by a wall of shipping containers. I parked the Honda and killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was immediate and heavy. I stepped out into the biting cold, my breath forming clouds in front of my face. The key August had given me felt heavy in my pocket, a cold lump of iron against my hip. I approached the roll-up door. It was painted a dull industrial gray. I slid the key into the padlock. It turned with a satisfying heavy click. I grabbed the handle and heaved the door upward. It rattled violently, the sound echoing like a gunshot across the empty facility, before settling into the open position. I expected dust. I expected old furniture, moth-eaten rugs, maybe a broken chandelier from a mansion I had never seen. I expected the debris of a rich man's life. I was wrong. The interior of Unit 714 was sterile. It looked less like a storage unit and more like an evidence locker. Under the harsh glare of a single motion sensor light that snapped on as I entered, I saw rows of industrial steel shelving units. They were bolted to the concrete floor, and on every shelf, lined up with military precision, were white banker's boxes. They were pristine, free of dust, and labeled with a label maker in a font that was clean and sans serif. Foundation grants. Fiscal year 2005. Keller House. Internal audits. Medical records. Restricted. Northbridge Trust. Beneficiary disbursement. I stood in the center of the concrete room, feeling the chill seep through the soles of my sneakers. This was not a closet. This was a tomb, but it did not hold bodies. It held the paper trail of my entire existence. I walked to the shelf labeled Keller House. Elise R. N. My hands were shaking as I pulled the box down. It was heavy. I set it on a small metal folding table that had been set up in the corner, presumably for exactly this purpose. I lifted the lid. The smell of old paper and toner hit me. I reached in and pulled out the first file. It was a medical file. Patient Elise Ramirez, age 7, diagnosis acute emotional distress, attachment disorder, treatment plan, weekly behavioral therapy with Dr. Eris Thorne. I stared at the page. I remembered being 7. I remembered crying because a jagged spring in my mattress had cut my leg. I remembered Rhonda Keller telling me to stop whining or I would lose dessert. I had never seen a therapist named Dr. Eris Thorne. I had never seen a therapist, period. I flipped to the billing section attached to the file. Invoice 4402. Services rendered 45 sessions of cognitive behavioral therapy. Cost $6,750. Status paid in full by Northbridge Family Foundation. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline in my stomach. They had billed the foundation for therapy I never received. I dug deeper. There were invoices for specialized nutritional plans, totaling $300 a month. I remembered eating oatmeal that was watered down so much it looked like gray soup. I remembered the powdered milk that clumped in the glass. There were receipts for educational enrichment camps in the summers of 2008 and 2009. Those were the summers I spent scrubbing the grout in the Keller House bathrooms with a toothbrush, because Rhonda said idle hands were the devil's workshop. I shoved the medical file aside and grabbed a folder marked Correspondence, Board of Directors. This was where the narrative turned from simple embezzlement to something far more calculated. I found a meeting transcript dated 12 years ago. I would have been 18 then, the age where most fosters are kicked out of the system. I remembered being terrified of that birthday, wondering if I would be sleeping under a bridge. But Rhonda had suddenly been generous, offering to let me stay on as a volunteer assistant in exchange for room and board. I read the transcript. Meeting date: May 3rd, 2012. Attendee Vivian Northbridge Chair. Rhonda Keller Director. Board members. Subject: The Elise Case. Transition Plan. Vivian's name jumped out at me, her words recorded by a stenographer who likely had no idea what they were typing. Vivian Northbridge. We need to discuss the optics of the Ramirez girl aging out. If she leaves the facility, we lose the narrative hook for the autumn gala. Her face tests well with the donors in the 40 to 60 demographic. Rhonda Keller. She is requesting vocational school. She wants to learn graphic design. The tuition is $4,000. Vivian Northbridge. That is an unnecessary expense. If she becomes independent, she becomes a liability. We need to keep her close, keep her in the house. Offer her a position as a resident assistant. No salary, just room and board. Frame it as her giving back to the family that saved her. It keeps the overhead low and the stipend flowing. Rhonda Keller. And the stipend, the Education Trust. Vivian Northbridge. Convert it to a care and maintenance grant, payable to the administration. We can justify it as living expenses for a special needs adult resident. I lowered the paper. My hands were trembling so hard the page rattled. Special needs adult resident. They had categorized me as incompetent to keep the money. They had denied me an education, a career, a life, just to keep the $50,000 a year spigot open. I was not a person to them. I was an asset. I was a piece of livestock that they needed to keep in the pen because I produced milk. I grabbed another box. Legal. Trust inquiries. Inside. I found a letter from 10 years ago. It was on heavy, cream-colored stationery from a law firm in Chicago. It was addressed to Mr. August Northbridge. Dear Mr. Northbridge, per your request, I have attempted to review the status of the beneficiary clause regarding the Ramirez line. I have concerns regarding the interpretation of Clause 11.4. If the child is indeed deceased as the death certificate indicates, the trust assets should have reverted to the general pool. However, the continued disbursements to the Keller house under her name create a legal paradox. I strongly advise a forensic audit. Across the front of the letter, in red ink, was a stamp, "Return to sender," and handwritten below it in a script I recognized as Vivian's elegant, sharp, and spiked client unavailable due to health restrictions. All inquiries must go through power of attorney. She had intercepted his mail. She had cut him off. She had gaslit him into thinking he was senile while she robbed his company and erased his granddaughter. I looked around the room. The sheer volume of paper was suffocating. Every box was a year of my life stolen. Every invoice was a meal I missed. Every memo was a lie told about my character. I had spent my nights at the Starlight wondering what was wrong with me. Why was I so unlovable? Why did I always fall through the cracks? Now, standing in the cold light of Unit 714, I realized I had never fallen through the cracks. I had been pushed, and then they had built a floor over my head and charged admission to stand on it. At the bottom of a box marked Personal, A.N., I found something different. It was a small black velvet jewelry box, but when I opened it, there were no diamonds. There was a black USB drive. A piece of masking tape on it read, Bluebird, 2010, Founder. Next to it was a business card. The cardstock was thick, textured, Morgan Price, Paralegal Strategy, Internal Affairs, Conflict Resolution. On the back of the card, in a shaky, jagged handwriting that matched the note on the envelope I had received in the parking lot, were instructions. When you are ready, call her. Do not call their lawyers. Do not call the police yet. They own the police. Call Morgan. I took the USB drive and the card. I shoved them into the pocket of my jeans. I stood there for one last moment, breathing in the smell of the dust and the lies. A strange sensation washed over me. It was not fear anymore. It was not even sadness. It was clarity. For 30 years, I had been fighting a fog. I had been fighting a ghost story. Now, I could see the wires. I could see the machinery. And if you can see how a machine is built, you can take it apart. I put the lid back on the box labeled with my name. I shoved it back onto the shelf. I turned off the light. The darkness rushed back in, instant and absolute. I walked out of the unit and pulled the rolling door down. The metal crashed against the concrete, a sound of finality. I snapped the padlock shut and twisted the key. As I pulled the key out, I looked at the closed door. It looked like a vault. It looked like a crypt. I slid the white key card back into my pocket. "Goodbye, orphan," I whispered to the cold morning air. I walked back to my car. The sky to the east was beginning to turn a pale, bloodless gray. It was almost 6 in the morning. August Northbridge was waiting for me at the Bluebird Diner. And for the first time in my life, I was not going to a meeting to beg for scraps. I was going to a war council. The Bluebird Diner was one of those places that seemed to exist outside of time, anchored in the 1950s by sheer stubbornness and the smell of bacon grease. The air inside was thick and humid, carrying the heavy scent of burnt coffee, maple syrup, and the distinct chemical lemon of floor wax. It was 6 in the morning, the shift change hour for half the town, and the place was humming with the low murmur of miners and railway workers. I walked in, the bell above the door jingling with a cheerfulness that made my headache throb. I was still wearing my Starlight uniform. It was a hideous shade of polyester orange and blue, stained with the varied grime of a 9-hour shift motor oil, slushy syrup, and the pervasive, clinging stink of gasoline. I felt dirty. I felt like a smudge on a clean tablecloth. When I walked past the counter, the waitress, a woman named Barb, who had known me since I was a kid in foster care, gave me a tight, pitying smile. It was the look everyone in Hollow Creek gave me. The "oh, poor thing" still trying look. I kept my head down and headed for the back. August Northbridge was sitting in the last booth, tucked away in the corner where the shadows from the privacy partition were deepest. He looked different than he had in the parking lot. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner, he looked older. The lines around his mouth were etched deep, like canyons in a dry landscape. He was not wearing the expensive wool coat anymore. It was folded neatly on the vinyl bench beside him. He wore a charcoal suit that looked tailored, crisp, and entirely alien in a room full of flannel and denim. He did not stand up when I approached. He just gestured to the seat opposite him. "Sit down, Elise," he said. His voice was low, a rumble that barely carried over the noise of the kitchen. I slid into the booth. The red vinyl was cracked and taped over with silver duct tape, which scraped against my jeans. I put my hands on the table, then pulled them back, realizing my fingernails were still rimmed with grease from cleaning the hot dog roller. "I went to the storage unit," I said. I did not say hello. I did not offer pleasantries. I just wanted to get the bomb out of my chest. "I assumed you would," August said. He picked up a silver coffee pot that had been left on the table and poured a cup. He pushed it toward me. Black, no sugar. "Drink. You look like you are about to collapse." I ignored the coffee. "I saw the files. I saw the money. I saw the death certificate." August nodded slowly. He did not look ashamed, which surprised me. He looked focused. He reached into a leather portfolio sitting next to his elbow and pulled out a long, folded sheet of paper. He unfolded it across the table, smoothing the creases with a hand that was large and veined, shaking ever so slightly. It was a timeline. I stared at it. It was a printed spreadsheet, detailed and clinical. August 3rd. Subject begins employment at Starlight 24. August 15th. Subject denied overtime by manager. Sleeps in car for 2 nights. September 2nd. Subject returns lost wallet to customer. Refuses $40 reward. October 10th. Subject pays for customer's milk when customer's card declines. Cost $4.50. Subject's remaining bank balance $12. I looked up at him, a cold chill washing over me that had nothing to do with the weather outside. You were stalking me. I was vetting you, August corrected, his eyes, that piercing steel gray, locked onto mine. I was auditing the only asset I have left that has not been corrupted. I am not an asset, I snapped. I am a person, and that, I pointed to the entry about the milk, was private. That was just me buying a lady some milk. Why were you watching me and doing nothing if you knew I was sleeping in my car? Why did you not help? Because I needed to know, August said. And for the first time, his voice cracked. He leaned forward, the granite facade slipping just an inch. I needed to know if the machine had broken you yet. I needed to know if growing up in that house, under their thumb, had turned you into one of them, bitter, greedy, transactional. He tapped the entry about the milk. You had $12 to your name, Elise, and you gave away $4.50 to a stranger because her baby was crying. That told me everything I needed to know. It told me that you are not a Northbridge, not in the way that matters to them. You are something else, something dangerous to their system. I looked away, staring at the steam rising from the coffee cup. So I passed your test. Congratulations. What do I win? A grandfather who let me believe I was trash for 30 years. You win a chance to burn it all down, August said. He pulled a pen from his pocket and drew a red circle around a date at the bottom of the timeline, December 21st. Today is December 1st, August said. You have been working at the Starlight for 5 months and 1 week. You have paid your own rent. You have bought your own food. You have taken $0 from the foundation, the trust, or any entity associated with the family. I stopped taking their money because I hate them, I said. You stopped taking their money, August said. And in doing so, you started a countdown clock they do not even know exists. That clause you read 11.4. I wrote that 20 years ago with a lawyer who is now dead. It was my fail-safe, my kill switch. He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze drifting to the window where the sun was starting to bleed into the gray sky. When my son died, your father, I broke. I admit that. I was weak. Vivian and the others, they stepped in. They told me I needed rest. They told me I was losing my grip. Then they told me you had died. They showed me the grave, and I checked out. I let them run the company. I let them run the charity. I became the ghost in the big house. He looked back at me, his eyes hardening. But ghosts see things. I started noticing discrepancies in the accounts about 5 years ago. Money going to the Keller house for a special needs ward that did not exist. I hired private investigators, but I could not act. If I had come forward then, Vivian would have used my mental health history against me. She would have declared me incompetent, taken power of attorney, and buried the evidence. I needed a weapon. I needed a proxy. He pointed a finger at me. You are the proxy, Elise, but the clause is specific. Forgotten heir. You have to be independent. You have to be outside the ecosystem for 6 continuous months. I did the math in my head. 3 weeks, I whispered. I have to make it 3 more weeks. Exactly, August said. 3 weeks, and those 3 weeks are going to be the hardest of your life. Why? I asked. I just keep going to work. I keep paying rent. It is not hard. It is just miserable. I am used to miserable. It will not just be miserable, August said grimly. It will be war. Because as soon as I stepped out of that car in the parking lot this morning, the clock started ticking for them too. Vivian has spies everywhere. By noon today, she will know we met. She will not know about the clause she thinks that old trust deed is buried in an archive she shredded years ago, but she will know I am making contact, and she will panic. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. They will try to break your streak, Elise. They will try to force you to take money. Vivian will offer you a house. She will offer you a check with 6 zeros on it. She will call it back pay or inheritance. If you deposit 1 cent of it, the 6-month clock resets to 0. And if they cannot buy you, they will try to destroy your independence. They will try to get you fired from the Starlight. They will try to get you evicted. They will try to have you committed for psychiatric evaluation so that you are no longer competent to hold the proxy. I felt the blood drain from my face. They would go that far. They billed $1 million for your childhood while you wore secondhand shoes. August said, "What do you think?" I slumped back against the vinyl seat. The weight of it was crushing. I was just a cashier. I scanned barcodes and mopped floors. I was not a soldier. "I cannot fight them," I said. "They own the town. They own the police. You said it yourself." "You do not have to fight them alone," August said. "I have a plan. It has 3 prongs. I call it the trident." He held up one finger. 1. Documentation. That is where Morgan comes in. You have her card. She is the best paralegal I have ever seen. She operates out of a basement because she refuses to play politics. She is going to take those boxes you saw and build a wall of evidence. Every stolen dollar, every fake invoice, every lie. We are not just going to sue them. We are going to indict them. He held up a second finger. 2. Testimony. Documents are dry. We need voices. We need the people they stepped on. There are former staff members from the Keller house who were fired for asking questions. There is a pastor who knows the truth about the donations. There are social workers who were blocked from helping you. We find them. We get them on record. He held up a third finger. 3. The ambush. In 3 weeks, on December 21st, the Foundation is holding its quarterly board meeting. Vivian is planning to propose a motion to dissolve the old trust and merge everything into a new entity, one that cuts out the old clauses. She wants to erase 11.4 before anyone finds it. We are going to walk into that meeting. You are going to walk into that meeting, and you are going to cast my vote. I looked at his hand, then at his face. You want me to walk into a boardroom full of billionaires and lawyers and tell them they are fired? I want you to walk in there and tell them they are finished, August said. I looked down at my hands. They were rough, chapped from the cold and the cleaning chemicals. I do not want revenge. August, I do not want to be like them. I just want it to stop. I want to stop being their story. I want to stop being the poor orphan they sell. Revenge is emotional. Elise, August said firmly, revenge is slashing tires or screaming insults. What we are doing is not revenge. It is mechanics. We are fixing a broken machine. The machine is eating people. It ate my son. It ate your mother. It tried to eat you. We are just turning it off. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was a single page. This is an agreement, he said. Read it. I took the paper. It was short, simple. Agreement between August Northbridge and Elise Ramirez. 1. August Northbridge agrees to provide legal counsel and strategic support. 2. Elise Ramirez agrees to maintain independent employment and residence until December 21st. 3. No financial assets, loans, or gifts shall be transferred between parties until the condition of Clause 11.4 is met. 4. Upon success, the goal is total transparency and the establishment of a permanent, non-revocable seat on the board for the undersigned. A seat, I read aloud. A seat, August repeated. Not a folding chair, not a spot in the back. A real seat at the table. One they can never take away. One where you decide where the money goes. You decide who gets help. You decide if the orphans get coats or if the directors get retreats. He looked at me, waiting. I cannot give you money. Elise, he said, I cannot buy you dinner. I cannot even pay for your gas. If I do, they win. You have to stay broke. You have to keep working that shift. You have to let them spit on you for 3 more weeks. Can you do that? I looked at the timeline again. I looked at the date where I bought the milk. I thought about Doug screaming at me over $14. I thought about the cold wind in the parking lot. I thought about the girl in the brochure, holding the teddy bear, being used as a prop. I picked up the pen. I will keep the job, I said. My voice was steady now. I will keep the apartment. I will not take a dime from anyone. I signed my name at the bottom of the paper, Elise Ramirez. I pushed the paper back to him. But when this is over, I said, meeting his eyes, I do not want the money for myself. I want the foundation to actually do what it says it does. August smiled. It was a small, grim smile, but it was real. That is why you are the heir, Elise, and that is why they should be terrified. He folded the paper and put it back in his portfolio. He stood up and threw a $20 bill on the table for the coffee. I am paying for the coffee, he said. Consider it a business meeting expense. That is allowed. He buttoned his jacket. Go to work tonight. Elise, watch your back. If anyone offers you anything, a sandwich, a ride, a winning lottery ticket, you walk away. Call Morgan Price. She is expecting you. He turned and walked out of the diner. His stride long and purposeful. He looked like a general marching to the front lines. I sat there for a moment longer, alone in the booth. I wrapped my cold hands around the warm ceramic mug. I took a sip. It was bitter, burnt, and strong. I drank it all. Then I stood up, smoothed down my orange polyester uniform, and walked out the door. I had a shift to get to, and for the first time in 30 years, I was not just clocking in, I was reporting for duty. Morgan Price's office was not located in a glass tower downtown. It was in the basement of a converted brownstone on the edge of the historic district, a space that smelled of radiator dust and intense focus. It was the kind of room where sunlight came to die, but where the truth was dragged out into the open and dissected under halogen bulbs. I walked in 2 hours after leaving August at the diner. Morgan was already moving. She was a woman who seemed to vibrate at a higher frequency than the rest of the world. She wore a navy blue blazer with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and her hair was pulled back into a bun so tight it looked painful. She did not offer me coffee. She did not ask how I was feeling. She simply pointed to a massive whiteboard that covered the entire north wall of the room. Welcome to the war room, Morgan said, her voice crisp and dry. I call this masterpiece the Wall of Omission. The board was covered in sticky notes, printouts, and red string. It looked like the mind of a conspiracy theorist, except every single piece of paper on it was a certified bank statement or a sworn affidavit. August gave me the keys to the storage unit digital archives last night, she said, capping a red marker with a vicious click. I have been pulling data since 3 a.m. Grab a chair. Elise, we are going to play a game called Where Did the Money Go? I sat down in a squeaky office chair. On the large monitor on her desk, a spreadsheet was open. It was color-coded and terrifyingly detailed. Okay, Morgan said, tapping the screen. I have broken down 6 years of the Elise Care stipend. That is what they called the $50,000 a year the foundation sent to the Keller house specifically for you. I have split the spending into 3 columns. Column A is the money coming in. Column B is money spent directly on you. Column C as well. Let us call it creative accounting. She zoomed in. Year 1, she recited. Input $50,000. Column B, direct expenses for Elise, $412. 400, I asked, blinking. That is it. That covers 2 pairs of shoes from a discount store, 1 winter coat also discount, and 12 refills of a generic asthma inhaler. Morgan read, Now, look at column C. $49,588 went to facility upgrades and administrative oversight. She clicked a link, and a scanned invoice popped up. Specifically, she said, a kitchen modernization project for the director's private residence attached to the main house, granite countertops, a Viking range, and a sub-zero fridge. I stared at the screen. I remembered that kitchen. I was allowed to scrub the floor in there, but I was never allowed to open that fridge. Year 3, Morgan continued, her rhythm picking up speed like a drumbeat. Input, $52,000 inflation adjustment. Direct expenses for Elise, $0. 0. According to the notes, you acted out that year and lost your privileges for new clothing or external activities. Morgan said, however, the Administrative Transport Fund purchased a brand new Lexus SUV for the director to safely transport residents to appointments. Did you ever ride in a Lexus? Elise, I took the bus, I said, my voice hollow. Or I walked. Thought so, Morgan said. She slapped a sticky note onto the wall. It was bright red. That is fraud, plain and simple, but it is hard to prove intent with just numbers. They can argue overhead. They can argue that buying a luxury car helps the children by boosting staff morale. We need to prove that the cruelty was the point. That is where your neighbor comes in. Eli, I asked. Eli Torres, Morgan said. I called him an hour ago. August told me he's a white-hat hacker who works security for the bank downtown. I sent him the raw data from the Keller House social media accounts. He is patching in now. The large monitor flickered, and the face of my neighbor appeared. Eli was sitting in his apartment. I recognized the peeling wallpaper behind him, wearing a headset, and looking entirely too awake for someone who usually slept until noon. Hey, Elise, Eli said. He sounded serious, devoid of his usual joking tone. You okay? I am getting there, I said. Listen, Eli said, looking down at his keyboard. This stuff Morgan sent me, it is messed up. Elise, really messed up. I ran a facial recognition script on the last 10 years of photos from the Keller House Facebook and Instagram pages. I scraped everything public posts, deleted albums, the stuff they tagged but hid from the timeline. Show us, Eli, Morgan commanded. The screen changed. It was now displaying a complex infographic. It looked like a heat map. Okay, Eli's voice narrated. I set the parameters to find your face. I cross-referenced it with the metadata of the photo's dates, times, locations. Then I cross-referenced that with the key objects in the framed dinner tables, food, gifts, other people. A series of photos cascaded across the screen. Here is the data set for holiday feasts, Eli said. 5 years of Christmas parties. Look at the main table. In every single shot, there are 12 chairs. In every single shot, 11 chairs are filled with other kids, staff, or donors. One chair is always empty. He zoomed in on a photo from 4 years ago. The empty chair was right in the center, next to the director. Now, look where you are, Eli said. A red box appeared on the far right of the photo, deep in the background. I was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a tray of dirty dishes. My face was blurry, but the software had locked onto it. I analyzed the timestamps, Eli continued. You were in the room for a total of 43 minutes during that party. For 41 of those minutes, you were standing within 3 feet of the sink or the trash can, 0 minutes seated at the table. And here is the kicker, Morgan interrupted, pointing to a text overlay on the photo. Read the caption they posted with this picture. I read the cheerful, cursive font. Every child has a seat at our table. At Keller House, nobody eats alone. They use the empty chair as a symbol, Eli said, his voice tight with anger. They told the donors, look, we have room for one more. Please donate. But the kid who was supposed to be in that chair was washing the dishes in the background. It is a pattern, Morgan said, stepping back to the wall. She pinned a printout of the infographic next to the financial statements. Exclusion? It was not accidental. Elise? It was engineered. They needed you visible enough to be a prop, but marginalized enough to never feel like you belonged. If you sat at the table, you might talk to a donor. You might say, hey, I am hungry. If you are in the kitchen, you are just a silent image of service. I have more, Eli said. I found the metadata on the Save Our Orphans campaign posters, the ones with your face. They adjusted the saturation levels on your skin to make you look paler, sicker, and they used Photoshop to add shadows under your eyes. They literally digitally enhanced your misery. Thanks, Eli, Morgan said. Send me the full report. I want it printed on high-gloss paper. You got it, Eli said. And Elise, if you need help burying these people, I own a shovel. The connection cut. I sat there, staring at the wall. The red sticky notes were the stolen money. The blue printouts were the photos of me standing by the sink. It was a mosaic of my life, laid out in data points. It gets worse, Morgan said softly. I am sorry, Elise, but we have to rip the whole bandage off. She walked over to a side table and picked up 2 legal documents. They were affidavits, sworn statements signed in the presence of a notary. Documentation and technology are great, Morgan said, but we need human voices. August gave me a list of names this morning, people who used to be in the orbit of the Keller house but were pushed out. I spent the last 3 hours tracking them down and getting them to talk. She handed me the first document. Reverend Marcus Cole, she said. He retired 3 years ago. He used to run the Sunday service at the chapel the foundation supports. I looked at the signature. It was shaky, old. Marcus Cole, hereby attest that on multiple occasions between 2010 and 2015, Rhonda Keller and Vivian Northbridge approached me prior to services. They specifically requested that I lead the congregation in prayer for the troubled soul of Elise Ramirez. They instructed me to frame her as ungrateful, angry, and resistant to grace. When I suggested that Elise seemed like a normal, quiet child, Vivian Northbridge told me that the donors need a redemption arc, and to have redemption, you first need a sinner. They used the pulpit to poison the community's perception of the child before she even had a chance to speak. I felt a hot tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. I remembered those Sundays. I remembered sitting in the pew, feeling the eyes of the entire town burning into the back of my neck as the Reverend prayed for my hardened heart. I had thought I was evil. I had thought there was something wrong with me that even God could not fix. They weaponized prayer, I whispered. They made sure that if I ever ran away, nobody in town would take me in because they thought I was a monster. Exactly, Morgan said. She handed me the second affidavit. And this one explains why you never got adopted. The name at the bottom was Jeannie Ward. I remembered her. She was a young social worker with kind eyes who had lasted about 6 months at the agency before suddenly quitting. I had liked her. She had brought me a book once. Jeannie Ward, former caseworker, attests that during my tenure, I identified 3 separate potential foster families who expressed strong interest in Elise Ramirez. These were stable, high-income households. In each instance, when I prepared the transfer paperwork, Director Keller intervened. She, in conjunction with Vivian Northbridge, placed a medical psychological hold on the file, citing severe behavioral instability that required specialized institutional care. I was told to inform the families that Elise was too dangerous to be in a home with other children. When I asked for the clinical evidence of this instability, I was terminated for insubordination. Elise was not dangerous. She was profitable. The paper shook in my hands. 3 families. 3 times I could have had a room of my own. A mom. A dad. A dog. A life where I did not have to hoard crackers under my mattress. They had not just stolen the money. They had stolen my destiny. They had looked at a little girl who desperately wanted a home and said, "No, she is worth $50,000 a year if we keep her in the cage." "It is a trifecta," Morgan said, her voice cold and hard as steel. She started pinning the affidavits to the wall. She used purple pushpins for these. "Blue for exclusion," she said, pointing to the photos. "Red for financial theft," she pointed to the spreadsheets. "And purple for defamation and sabotage." She stepped back. The wall was full. It was a chaotic, colorful, undeniable map of abuse. "This is not a sob story anymore, Elise," Morgan said. "This is a RICO case. This is racketeering. This is fraud. This is conspiracy." I stood up and walked to the wall. I reached out and touched the purple paper with Jeannie Ward's signature. For 30 years, I had walked around with a heavy stone in my chest. I had carried the weight of being the bad kid, the ungrateful orphan, the lost cause. I had let Doug scream at me at the starlight because I thought I deserved it. I had let the world treat me like garbage because I thought I was garbage. But looking at this wall, the stone cracked. It wasn't me. It had never been me. I was not unlovable. I was just inconveniently alive. A strange sound escaped my throat. It was half sob, half laugh. "They wrote it all down," I said. "They were so arrogant they wrote it all down." People like Vivian and Rhonda always do, Morgan said. They think they are untouchable, so they keep receipts. They think the law is something that happens to poor people. She walked over to her desk and hit a key on her keyboard. The printer in the corner whirred to life. It churned out a single, thick label. Morgan took a fresh manila folder. She stuck the label onto the tab. She handed the folder to me. "We are not filing a lawsuit yet," Morgan said. "Lawsuits take years. We are building a finding of fact. This is what we are going to drop onto the boardroom table in 3 weeks." I looked at the label. "In the matter of Elise Ramirez versus the story of the orphan they sold." "It is not a legal title," Morgan admitted with a small, sharp smile. "But I think it sets the tone." I ran my thumb over the raised letters of my name. "We have the documents," I said, looking at the wall. "We have the data. We have the witnesses." "We have the gun," Morgan corrected. "Now we just need to keep you alive long enough to pull the trigger." She glanced at the clock. "You have a shift at 10, right?" "Yeah," I said. "Doug will fire me if I am late." "Then go," Morgan said. "Go back to the Starlight. Put on that orange vest. Smile at the customers. Let Rhonda see you scrubbing the floors. Let Vivian think she is safe. Every day you clock in for $9 an hour. You are digging their grave a little deeper." I nodded. I grabbed my bag. I looked at the wall one last time, the blue, the red, the purple. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was the truth. "Thank you, Morgan," I said. "Do not thank me," she said, already turning back to her computer screen. "Thank August, and thank the version of you that survived. Now get out of here. You have hot dogs to rotate." I walked out of the basement office and into the bright, cold sunlight of the morning. The wind hit my face, but for the first time in years, it did not make me shiver. I felt warm. I felt dangerous. I got into my Honda, started the engine, and drove toward the Starlight. I had a job to do, and for the first time, I knew exactly who I was working for. The silence that followed my meeting with August lasted exactly 48 hours. It was the calm before the artillery barrage. They did not know I had the documents. They did not know I had the Triple Trident plan, but they knew August had made contact, and that was enough to send a tremor of panic through the Northbridge ecosystem. The first shell landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my freezing kitchen, eating toast that was slightly stale, when my phone chimed. It was an email from an address I did not recognize, but the domain name was Familiar Office of the Director at northbridgefoundation.org. The subject line read, "Family Assistance Proposal, Private and Confidential." I opened it. The text was written in a font that tried to look like handwriting, warm and personal, but it was pure corporate calculation. "Dearest Elise, we were so distressed to hear that you are living in such difficult circumstances. It breaks my heart to think of family struggling. We know you have been distanced lately, but we want to help. Attached is a proposal for a monthly living stipend of $5,000, plus a 30% down payment on a starter home in the Garden District. We just want you safe. All we ask is that you sign the attached family unity agreement so we can move forward without any legal confusion. With love, Vivian." My thumb hovered over the attachment. $5,000 a month. That was more money than I made in 4 months at the Starlight. A house in the Garden District meant heat that worked. It meant no train rattling my windows. It meant safety. I forwarded the email to Morgan immediately. 2 minutes later, Morgan called me. "Do not touch it," she said, her voice sharp. "I just read the attachment. It is not a unity agreement. It is a waiver." Paragraph 4. Subsection B. It explicitly states that by accepting these funds, you waive any and all future claims to the Northbridge Trust and acknowledge that you have no standing in family governance. It is a bribe, a lease, and it is a cheap one. $5,000 does not feel cheap, I said, looking at my empty fridge. Compared to the millions they stole from you? Morgan asked. It is pennies. They are trying to buy a diamond for the price of a glass bead. Ignore it. I am not replying, I said. Good, Morgan said. Because since the bribe did not work instantly, the second wave is coming. Check Facebook. I do not use Facebook, I said. Check the Keller House page, she commanded. And do not throw your phone. I hung up and opened the browser. I navigated to the page. The top post had been uploaded 20 minutes ago. It already had 300 reactions and 50 comments. It was a photo of Rhonda Keller. She was sitting in a rocking chair, surrounded by a group of ethnically diverse, sad-looking children. She was looking off camera with a tragic expression, clutching a handkerchief. The caption read, "A mother's heart is never truly whole when one of her flock goes astray." We pour our souls into these children, giving them a bed, a meal, and a future when the world has left them behind. It shatters my spirit to learn that one of our beloved alumni, a girl I tucked in every night for 18 years, has returned not with gratitude, but with a lawyer and demands for money. We pray for Elise today. We pray that she finds peace and releases the greed that has hardened her heart against the only family she ever had. I felt the blood drain from my face. The only family, I whispered. I scrolled down to the comments. Susan M. How could she, after everything you did for her ungrateful brat? Debbie T. Money changes people. Stay strong. Rhonda, we know the truth. Local Hero 44. I remember that girl. Always had a scowl on her face. Bad seed. They were dissecting me. People who had never spoken a word to me were painting a portrait of a monster. My phone buzzed again. It was not an email this time. It was Doug, my manager at the Starlight. Come to the office, now. I grabbed my jacket. My shift did not start for another 4 hours. This was not about the schedule. I drove to the gas station, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The Trident plan relied on one crucial thing, me keeping this job. I had to have 6 months of independent income. I had 3 weeks left. If I lost this job, the clock reset. And if the clock reset, Vivian won. I walked into the store. The day shift clerk, a teenager named Kevin, looked at me and quickly looked away. He had seen the Facebook post. Everyone had. I walked to the back office. Doug was sitting behind his desk, which was covered in lottery receipts and empty energy drink cans. He looked nervous. He was sweating, despite the fact that the office was freezing. Sit down, Elise, he said, not making eye contact. I sat. What is going on? Doug? I got a call today, Doug said, fiddling with a stapler. From a lady. She said she was like a mother to you, from that home you grew up in. Rhonda, I said flatly. She was crying, Doug said. She told me she was worried about you. She said you have been having episodes, that you are fixated on some conspiracy about your family. She said you might be unstable, dangerous, even... He finally looked at me. His eyes were filled with a mix of fear and self-righteousness. Elise, I run a 24-hour business here. I have got people coming in alone at night. I cannot have a liability behind the counter. If you snap, if you hurt a customer... I have never hurt a customer, I said, my voice steady. I am the only employee who actually cleans the roller grill. Doug? Yeah, well, mental health is tricky, Doug said, parroting words he clearly did not understand. Liability is tricky. I think it is best if we cut your hours. Maybe take you off the schedule for a few weeks, until you get help. Panic flared in my chest. A few weeks meant breaking the continuous employment streak. It meant the end of the clause. You are firing me because of a phone call, I asked. Not firing, Doug corrected quickly. Just suspending. For safety. I took a deep breath. I thought about Morgan. I thought about the wall of evidence. I channeled the cold, hard anger of August Northbridge. Doug, I said. I pulled out my phone and set it on the desk. Screen up, recording app open. Did this caller identify herself by name? Doug blinked. Yeah. She said she was Mrs. Keller. And did she provide any medical documentation stating I was unfit for work? I asked. Did she show you a police report? A court order? Well, no. But she was crying, Doug stammered. She sounded really upset. So you are making a personnel decision based on hearsay from a woman who is currently the subject of a pending legal investigation for fraud? I asked. The words felt heavy and sharp in my mouth. Investigation, Doug squeaked. I need you to write this down. Doug, I said, leaning forward, I want a written statement that you are suspending me due to an unsubstantiated phone call regarding my mental health. I need you to sign it and date it. I do not have to write anything, Doug said, getting defensive. You do if you do not want a wrongful termination lawsuit, I said. My lawyer is Morgan Price. Do you want her number? Or should I have her call corporate HR and ask them about the policy on harassment by third parties? Doug went pale. He knew corporate. He knew they hated lawsuits more than they hated losing money. Look, Elise, he said, holding up his hands. Let us not get lawyers involved. I'm just trying to look out for the store. Then let me do my job, I said. I show up, I work, I go home. If Rhonda calls again, you tell her to call my attorney. If you cut 1 hour from my schedule, Doug, I will assume you are part of the harassment campaign. Am I clear? Doug swallowed hard. He looked at the recording phone, then at me. He realized that the quiet girl who took all his abuse had suddenly disappeared. Fine, he muttered. Just keep the drama out of the store. Shift starts at 10. See you at 10, I said. I walked out of the office. My legs were shaking, but my head was high. I had held the line. I called Morgan from the car. He tried to suspend me, I said. Rhonda called him. I figured she would, Morgan said. I am sending a cease and desist to the Starlight corporate office right now. It frames the phone call as tortious interference with a business contract. They will call Doug within the hour and tell him that if he so much as looks at you wrong, he is fired. You are safe there. Elise, you are untouchable. They are getting desperate, I said. Good, Morgan said. Desperate people make mistakes. The mistakes came in the form of a pivot. The stick had failed. The bribe had failed. Now came the emotional manipulation. That evening, another email arrived. This one was from Vivian again, but the tone had shifted from corporate to cloying. Subject your mother. Elise, honey, please. I know you are angry. I know you think we abandoned you, but there is so much you do not know about your parents, about your mother. Elena, I have her diary. Elise, I have photos of her holding you. I can tell you who she really was. She loved you so much. Just meet me. No lawyers. Just family. We can set up a trust for you. We can give you an honorary seat on the family board, a voice, without the burden of the vote. You can be in the album this year. We can announce you to the world. Just come home. I stared at the screen. My mother, Elena, I had never seen a picture of her. I knew nothing about her except the name on the birth certificate. The temptation to say yes, to just go and get the diary, was a physical ache in my chest. But then I read the phrase again, honorary seat. A seat without a vote. A seat where I could sit and smile and be grateful while they continued to steal. A seat like the one in the Keller House kitchen, technically in the room, but functionally invisible. She is holding my mother hostage, I said to the empty room. She is using a dead woman as a bargaining chip. I opened a new document on my laptop. I did not reply to Vivian. Instead, I wrote a letter to the Keller House accounting department, to whom it may concern. Effective immediately. I am canceling the recurring monthly donation of $50 labeled alumni support fee that has been automatically deducted from my bank account for the last 10 years. I was informed this fee was mandatory for post-care support services. I have received no such services. Any further attempt to debit my account will be treated as theft. Furthermore, all future communication regarding my status, my family, or my employment must be directed to my legal counsel, Morgan Price. Do not contact me directly. Do not contact my employer. Do not contact my neighbors. Elise Ramirez. I printed it out. I drove to the post office and sent it via certified mail. Return receipt requested. The reaction was immediate and toxic. By the time I got to work that night, My phone was blowing up. Not from Vivian or Rhonda, but from the Keller family, the flying monkeys. Texts from numbers I did not know. How dare you hurt Rhonda? You are disgusting. Money-hungry witch. I stood behind the counter at the Starlight. It was Christmas Eve. The store was draped in sad silver tinsel that Doug had taped up. The radio was playing a tinny version of Silent Night. A notification popped up on my phone. It was a comment on Rhonda's post from a girl I used to share a bunk bed with. I always knew Elise was broken. She stole my hairbrush once. Now she is trying to steal from orphans. It hurt. It hurt more than the cold wind outside. These were people I had grown up with, people I had shared trauma with, and they were being weaponized against me. I looked at the phone, watching the hate roll in, line by line. Coordinate harassment, I whispered, repeating Morgan's advice. Save it. Archive it. It is not an insult. It is evidence. I took a screenshot, then another. I forwarded them all to Morgan's secure server. The bell above the door chimed. A woman walked in, holding the hand of a little boy. He could not have been more than 5. He was wearing a puffy coat that was too big for him, and he was eyeing the candy rack with wide, wondrous eyes. They walked up to the counter. The woman looked tired, worn out. She put a loaf of bread and a gallon of milk on the counter. And a Kit Kat, please, the little boy whispered, tugging on her sleeve. The woman sighed, checking her wallet. Not tonight, baby. We have to save for Santa. I looked at the boy. I looked at his hopeful face. I scanned the milk. I scanned the bread. Then I reached over, grabbed a king-size Kit Kat, and scanned it too. Total is $6, I said. The woman looked confused. The candy? I have a coupon, I lied. Employee discount. Merry Christmas. She looked at me, surprised, then smiled. A real, tired, grateful smile. Thank you. Merry Christmas. They walked out, the boy clutching his chocolate like it was gold. I stood there in the silence of the gas station. My phone buzzed again on the counter, another hateful message, another threat, another lie from the family that claimed to own me. I picked up the phone and turned it face down. I looked at the punch clock on the wall. It clicked over to midnight. December 25th. I had survived another day. I had kept the job. I had kept the house. I had not taken the bribe. Write whatever you want, I said to the silent phone. I am still here, and I am still clocking in. I grabbed the mop bucket. There was a spill in aisle 4. And for the first time in my life, cleaning up felt like an act of defiance. The legal assault did not begin with a bang, but with the quiet, terrifying rustle of expensive paper. 3 days after I rejected the bribe, a process server walked into the Starlight 24. He bought a pack of gum and handed me a thick envelope. He did not smile. He just said, "You have been served," and walked out before the door chime had even finished ringing. It was a petition filed in the County Superior Court, Vivian Northbridge versus August Northbridge and Elise Ramirez. The motion was for an emergency guardianship and the immediate suspension of all trust modifications, specifically citing Clause 11.4. The reasoning was brutal in its clinical detachment. Vivian claimed that her father, August, was suffering from advanced cognitive decline and senile susceptibility to undue influence. She painted a picture of a confused, elderly man being preyed upon by a volatile, financially unstable former ward of the state who had manipulated him into handing over the keys to the kingdom. Simultaneously, the public relations war went nuclear. Vivian launched what Morgan called the Pray for Father campaign. On every social media platform, photos of August appeared, but they were not recent. They were carefully curated images from 5 years ago, when he had been recovering from pneumonia. In the pictures, he looked frail, his skin gray, his eyes wandering. The caption was a masterpiece of gaslighting. Our hearts are breaking. Our beloved father, a man who built this town, is being dragged into a dispute he cannot possibly understand. We ask the community to pray for his protection against those who would exploit his twilight years for profit. Please, Let us keep the North Bridge legacy pure. The comments section was a chorus of sympathetic outrage. People I had served coffee to for months were suddenly experts on my predatory nature. I saw her yelling at her manager. One comment read a lie. "She always looked shifty," said another. I sat in Morgan's basement office, reading the petition. "They are calling him crazy," I said. "They are saying he does not know what day it is." "It is the standard playbook," Morgan said, not looking up from her typing. "If you cannot attack the facts, you attack the source. They need a judge to believe August is a vegetable so they can invalidate his signature on the proxy." "Is he?" I asked quietly. "I mean, he is old." Morgan stopped typing. She looked at me. "August Northbridge is sharper than a razor blade, Elise, and tonight he is going to prove it." That evening was the annual Winter Charity Gala. It was the biggest event in Hollow Creek, held in the ballroom of the Hotel Sovereign. It was the night when the coal barons and the railroad executives put on tuxedos and pretended that the town's poverty was a charming project rather than a systemic failure. Usually, Vivian Northbridge was the master of ceremonies. She would stand on stage in a glittering gown, weeping elegantly about the unfortunate children before asking for six-figure donations. But this year, a press release had gone out at noon. "Vivian Northbridge will regrettably be absent due to severe emotional distress caused by a family crisis. She is hiding," August said as he picked me up in the Cadillac. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He did not look frail. He looked like a mountain that had decided to wear formal wear. He handed me a garment bag. "Put this on," he said. "We are not going in the back door tonight." I changed in the bathroom of the Starlight before my shift ended. Doug had agreed to let me leave early after Morgan sent him a letter threatening to subpoena his texts with Rhonda. The dress was simple, black, and elegant. It was not flashy. It was dignified. When we arrived at the Hotel Sovereign, the valet rushed to open the door. I stepped out, taking August's arm. His grip was firm, steady. There was no tremor. We walked up the grand staircase. The ballroom doors were open, spilling golden light and the sound of a string quartet into the hallway. The air smelled of expensive perfume and roasted duck. We stepped into the room. The reaction was instantaneous. It started as a ripple near the door, then spread like a wave until the entire room of 300 people fell into a stunned silence. The string quartet actually stopped playing mid-measure. August Northbridge, the senile recluse, the man who was supposed to be in bed while his daughter prayed for him, was standing tall in the center of the room, and on his arm was the girl who pumped their gas. August did not hesitate. He walked us straight to the center table, the table reserved for the foundation board. It was empty, save for the place cards. He pulled out a chair for me. I sat down. He sat next to me. A waiter, pale and trembling, approached. "Mr. Northbridge, we were told you were indisposed." "I was," August said, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. "But I got hungry." He stood up then. He did not need a microphone. He had the kind of voice that had ordered mountains to be moved for 50 years. "I apologize for the interruption," August said to the room. "My daughter, Vivian, is unable to join us tonight. I understand she is suffering from emotional distress. It is a terrible thing. Distress. It often happens when you realize the checkbook has been taken away." A few nervous titters broke out, then were quickly stifled. "I have read the papers," August continued. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the bankers and the lawyers who had signed Vivian's petitions. "I hear that I am confused, that I am feeble, that I am being led astray by a young woman who wants my money." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is Elise Ramirez. For 30 years. You have all seen her face on the brochures on your tables. You have donated millions of dollars to feed her, clothe her, and save her." He paused, letting the weight of the money hang in the air. "I was told she was dead," August said, his voice dropping to a growl. "I was told I had no heir, so I slept. I let the machine run itself. But a few weeks ago, I sat in the parking lot of a gas station at 3 in the morning. I watched this young woman work a 9-hour shift for $80. I watched her pay for a stranger's milk with her own tips, and I realized something. He leaned forward, his eyes blazing. I am not senile. My vision is perfect. I just needed to change my perspective to see who was actually eating at the table and who was being forced to wash the dishes in the back. He raised his glass. Enjoy your dinner. My granddaughter and I have a lot of work to do. He sat down. The silence held for another 5 seconds. Then, flashbulbs started popping. The local reporter, a man who had been writing fluff pieces for Vivian for years, was frantically typing on his phone. By the next morning, the narrative had shattered. The headline on the Hollow Creek Gazette was not about a crazy old man. It read, "The Return of the King, August Northbridge introduces secret granddaughter at gala. The Pray for Father campaign evaporated." You cannot ask people to pray for the recovery of a man who looks like he could bench press the mayor. But Vivian did not back down. She doubled down. The hearing for the emergency guardianship was set for 2 days later. The courtroom was packed. Half the town was there, fueled by gossip and the sudden realization that the Northbridge empire was cracking. Vivian sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 3 lawyers from the city. She wore a modest gray suit and no makeup, trying to look like the grieving, concerned daughter. August and I sat with Morgan. We did not have a team of lawyers. We just had Morgan and a stack of boxes. Vivian's lead attorney, a man with a tan that looked sprayed on, stood up. "Your Honor," he began, his voice oozing concern, "we are not here to attack Ms. Ramirez. We are sure she is a lovely young woman, but the facts are clear. Mr. Northbridge is 82. He has a history of withdrawal." Suddenly, a woman appearing out of nowhere claiming to be a long-lost heir, a woman with a history of financial instability. It fits the classic profile of elder abuse. She is isolating him. She is confusing him. We are simply asking the court to pause everything, protect the assets, and order a full psychiatric evaluation for Mr. Northbridge. He sat down, looking smug. Judge Holloway, a stern woman who had presided over the county for 20 years, looked over her glasses at Morgan. "Ms. Price?" the judge said. "Your response?" Morgan stood up. She did not use flowery language. She did not ooze. She picked up a single file folder. "Your Honor," Morgan said, "the plaintiff argues that my client, Mr. Northbridge, is confused because he believes Ms. Ramirez is his granddaughter. The plaintiff argues that this belief is a symptom of dementia." Morgan walked to the bench and handed the file to the bailiff. "Inside this folder, Your Honor, you will find 2 documents. The first is a death certificate for Elise Northbridge, dated 30 years ago. It was filed by Vivian Northbridge. It claims the child died of respiratory failure." The judge opened the file. "The second document," Morgan continued, "is a catastrophic illness grant application filed by the Northbridge Foundation 6 months later. It requests funds for the ongoing specialized care of Elise Ramirez, a ward of the Keller House. It is signed by Vivian Northbridge." Morgan turned to look at Vivian, who was staring straight ahead, her face pale. "So, Your Honor," Morgan said, "we have a dilemma. Either Vivian Northbridge committed fraud 30 years ago by billing for the care of a dead child, or she is committing perjury today by claiming her father is crazy for believing that child is alive. The child cannot be dead for the grandfather and alive for the bank account. It has to be one or the other." A murmur went through the courtroom. The judge slammed her gavel. "Silence," Judge Holloway commanded. She read the documents. She looked at the dates. She looked at the signatures. Then she looked at Vivian. "Counselor," the judge said to Vivian's lawyer, "can you explain why your client has been signing checks for the care of a hallucination for 3 decades? The lawyer stood up, stuttering. "Your Honor, that is, administrative. We would need to review the context." "The context seems perfectly clear to me," Judge Holloway said. She closed the file with a snap. "The petition for emergency guardianship is denied," the judge ruled, "and it is denied with prejudice. I see absolutely no evidence that Mr. Northbridge is incapacitated. The only thing he seems to be suffering from is a sudden and lucid realization of who has been managing his affairs. She leaned forward. And let me be clear, if this court sees one more frivolous motion designed to delay the lawful execution of trust bylaws, I will hold the plaintiff in contempt. Is that understood? Yes, Your Honor. Vivian's lawyer whispered. We are not done, Your Honor, Morgan said. We would like to file a cross motion, a temporary restraining order. She handed another stack of papers to the bailiff. We are requesting that Vivian Northbridge and Rhonda Keller be barred from contacting Elise Ramirez, visiting her place of employment, or, and this is crucial, using her name, likeness, or childhood photographs in any fundraising materials, social media posts, or public statements. The Pray for Father campaign and the Prodigal Daughter posts are harassment, plain and simple. The judge scanned the screenshots of the Facebook comments and the emails offering bribes. Granted, Judge Holloway said immediately. 300 yards, and if I see one more photo of this young woman used to solicit donations, I will issue an arrest warrant for fraud. Court is adjourned. The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot ending a long, slow execution. Vivian stood up and stormed out of the courtroom, her lawyers trailing behind her like scolded dogs. She did not look at me. She could not. Looking at me. The crowd in the courtroom began to disperse, but the mood had shifted. The whispers were different now. They were not looking at me with pity or judgment. They were looking at me with something that felt dangerous respect. Did you hear that? A woman in the front row whispered to her husband. They billed for a dead kid. That is sick. If the judge believes it, it must be true. The husband replied. Maybe the old man is not the crazy one. I stood there, behind the defense table. I looked down at the copy of the restraining order the bailiff had just handed Morgan. Protected party Elise Ramirez. Restrained parties Vivian Northbridge, Rhonda Keller, for 30 years. My name had appeared on documents as a liability, as a ward, as a case number, as a tragedy to be managed. Today, for the first time, my name was on a document that said, I mattered. It said I was worth protecting. It said that the people who had owned me were now afraid of me. August put his hand on my shoulder. How does it feel? It feels like the first inning, I said. Good, August said, because the restraining order just stops them from talking to you. It does not stop them from destroying the company to save themselves. The board meeting is in 10 days. That is when we finish it. I looked at the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. I thought about the starlight. I still had a shift tonight. I still had to scan candy bars and mop floors. But now, when I walked out to my car, I wouldn't be looking over my shoulder. I was not the prey anymore. I was the hunter. And I had a license. The Marigold Room was the kind of restaurant where the menus did not list prices and the air smelled of old money and fresh lilies. It was located in the penthouse of the Sovereign Hotel, overlooking the smoking chimneys of the very town it exploited. This was where the Northbridge family held court. This was where deals were made over veal cutlets and quiet nods. And this was where Vivian Northbridge had invited me for peace talks. The invitation had come via a courier, not an email, a heavy cream-colored envelope with the Marigold Room's gold logo. Elise, the note read, no lawyers, no judges, just family. Let us break bread and fix this before the board meeting. Please, Aunt Viv. I showed it to Morgan. She scanned it for hidden legal traps, then handed it back. Go, she said, but do not eat anything you did not see them prepare, and wear a wire. I do not own a wire, I said. Your phone, Morgan said. Voice memo app. Keep it running in your purse. They are desperate. Elise, the restraining order cut off their ability to harass you, so now they are trying to charm you. They want to get you in a room where they control the environment. I arrived at noon. I wore my best clothes, a charcoal skirt suit I had bought at a thrift store for $12. It was clean and pressed, but next to the Italian wool and silk walking through the lobby, I felt like I was wearing a costume made of sandpaper. The maitre d', a man with a nose so upturned he seemed to be inspecting the ceiling, looked me up and down. Name? He asked. his tone implying that I was probably delivering a package. Elise Ramirez, I said. I am meeting the Northbridge party. His eyebrows shot up. Ah, yes, the Northbridge party. Right this way. He led me through the dining room. It was a sea of dark mahogany, white linen, and the soft clinking of silver against china. Every head turned as I walked by. The town knew who I was now. I was the secret granddaughter. I was the scandal. We reached a small, semi-private alcove in the back corner, shielded by a velvet rope and a large fern. Vivian and Rhonda were already there. They looked perfect. Vivian wore a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than my car. Her hair was a helmet of blonde perfection. Rhonda was in navy blue, looking every inch the pious, suffering martyr she played on Facebook. But something was wrong. The table was round, small, intimate. It was set with crystal glasses, heavy silverware, and linen napkins folded into swans. But there were only 2 place settings, 2 chairs, 2 water glasses, 2 menus. I stopped at the edge of the carpet. Vivian looked up, her face arranging itself into a beaming, welcoming smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elise, she cooed, half rising. So glad you came. We were worried you would bring that forceful woman. Morgan is busy building a case, I said, standing still. I see you are not expecting me. I gestured to the table. Vivian laughed, a tinkling, dismissive sound. Oh, don't be silly. We just wanted it to be intimate, close, here, sit. She waved her hand at the space between her chair and Rhonda's. There was no chair there, just empty air. We will just scooch, Vivian said, patting the banquette bench she was sitting on. Come sit by me, like old times. Old times? I asked. You mean when I slept in a closet? I turned to the busboy who was hovering nearby with a pitcher of water. He looked young, maybe 19, terrified of everything in the room. Excuse me, I said politely. Could we get a 3rd chair, please? And a place setting. The boy froze. He looked at me, then at Vivian, then at the maitre d' who was watching from a distance. He turned pale. I am sorry. Miss, he stammered. I cannot. You cannot bring a chair, I asked, confused. He swallowed hard, leaning in slightly so only I could hear. The reservation sheet. It has a note. From the host. It says... He looked at Vivian, who was suddenly very interested in her napkin. It says, table for 2, party of 3 expected, no extra chair, keep it intimate. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was not an oversight. It was a power move. They wanted me to squeeze onto the bench, to share their space, to physically lower myself to fit into their world. Or they wanted me to stand. Either way, I was not a guest. I was an appendage. I see, I said loud enough for the table to hear. The no extra chair policy. I remember that from the Christmas parties. I looked at the manager, who had hurried over. Bring a chair, I ordered. My voice was not loud, but it had the same timbre August had used at the gala. A real chair, now. The manager looked at Vivian. Vivian gave a tight, annoyed nod. A chair was brought. A place setting was laid. It took 3 minutes, during which Vivian and Rhonda sat in stony silence. I sat down. I did not unfold my napkin. So, I said, you wanted to talk family. Vivian cleared her throat. Regaining her composure, she reached under the table and pulled out a thick leather folder. She slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped just inches from my untouched water glass. We want to end this, Elise, Vivian said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. The courts, the restraining orders, the embarrassment. It is hurting the foundation. It is hurting the children. The children seem fine, I said. The audit shows you spent $40,000 on a staff retreat to Aspen last year. I am sure the kids enjoyed the photos. Rhonda flinched. That was for team building. You do not understand the stress of our work. I understand the stress of hunger, I said. which is something you build for but never experienced. Read the proposal, Vivian interrupted, tapping the folder. It is generous. Elise, beyond generous. I did not open it. Summarize it. Vivian took a sip of her sparkling water. A trust fund, fully vested, $5,000 a month for life, a house in the Garden District, deed in your name, mortgage paid, a seat on the Foundation's advisory council. Advisory, I repeated, not voting. You do not have the experience to vote on millions of dollars, Vivian said smoothly, but you can advise, you can pick the color of the tablecloths for the gala. You can hand out the turkeys at Thanksgiving. You can be the face of our redemption story. We will rewrite the narrative. Elise, we will tell the press that we found you, that it was a misunderstanding, that the family is whole again. You will be a Northbridge, officially, in the albums, in the will. And the condition? I asked. You drop the lawsuit, Vivian said. You rescind the restraining order, and you sign a waiver acknowledging that Clause 11.4 was a drafting error and has no legal standing. You give up the proxy. So I trade my vote for a house and a fake job, I said. You trade a war you cannot win for a life of comfort, Rhonda interjected, her voice sickly sweet. Think about it. Elise, you are working at a gas station. You are 30. Do you really want to spend the next 10 years fighting lawyers? We can drag this out until you are bankrupt, or you can sign this, walk out of here, and never worry about rent again. It sounded perfect. It sounded like everything I had dreamed of when I was 10 years old. Shivering in my bunk, a house, a family, a check. But then I looked at the table. I looked at the 2 original place settings. I looked at the busboy who had been ordered not to bring me a chair. They were not offering me a seat at the table. They were offering me a high-end version of the kitchen. They wanted me to be a pet, fed, housed, but leashed. I reached into my purse. I did not pull out a pen. I pulled out a photograph. It was one Eli had printed for me the night before. A high-resolution scan from the Keller House album, dated 20 years ago. It showed the main dining room of the Keller house on Thanksgiving. The table was laden with turkey, stuffing, pies. Vivian was there, laughing with a donor. Rhonda was carving the bird. There were 12 chairs. One was empty. In the background, blurry but visible, was a 10-year-old girl. Me. I was holding a tray of dirty dishes, standing by the swinging door to the kitchen. I was looking at the empty chair with a longing that broke my heart even now. I slid the photo across the table, right on top of the leather folder. This, I said, pointing to the empty chair in the photo. This is what you are selling me. Vivian looked down. She frowned. I do not understand. You kept that chair empty for 18 years, I said. You told the donors it was waiting for a child, but the child was standing 10 feet away, holding your dirty plates. You did not want me in the chair. Vivian, you wanted the empty chair. The empty chair makes money. The empty chair makes people sad. A child in the chair just eats the profits. I leaned forward. You are not offering me a family. You are offering me a bribe to go back to the kitchen. You want me to sign away my power so you can keep that chair empty forever. Rhonda's face crumbled. For a second, the mask slipped, and I saw pure, unadulterated panic. She looked old. She looked guilty. But Vivian hardened. Her eyes went cold, like the windows of a skyscraper in winter. You are a fool, she hissed. The charming aunt was gone. You think August can protect you? He is an old man. He will be dead in 5 years. And then what? You will be alone, no money, no family, no job, because I promise you, Elise, if you walk out of here without signing that, I will make sure no one in this state hires you to sweep a floor. You will be toxic. I will sue you for defamation until you are selling your blood to eat. Maybe, I said, but I will be eating at my own table. I stood up. I picked up the photo. I left the leather folder where it was. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. I dropped it onto the pristine white tablecloth, right next to the crystal water glass I hadn't touched. For the water, I said, and for the chair rental, I pay my own way. I turned and walked away. The silence in the marigold room was absolute. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, hateful, terrified eyes. As I passed the server station near the kitchen, I saw the manager holding a small slip of paper. He was staring at it, shaking his head. It was the reservation ticket. I stopped. "Can I see that?" I asked. The manager jumped. He looked at me, then at the table where Vivian was furiously texting on her phone. He looked back at me. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe it was rebellion. Maybe it was just decency. He handed me the slip. Reservation Northbridge, Table 21, VIP. Note: no extra chair. Isolate the guest. I pulled out my phone. I snapped a picture of the slip. "Thank you," I said to the manager. "You just helped fix the machine." He nodded, taking the slip back. "Good luck, Miss Ramirez." I walked out of the hotel and into the cold afternoon air. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I sent the photo to Morgan. 30 seconds later, she texted back, "Got it. Printed it. It is going on the wall right next to the affidavit. Title: Intent, not accident. They just proved they never intended to let you in. This destroys their family unity defense." I got into my car. I had a shift at the Starlight in 2 hours. I had to change out of my suit and into my polyester uniform. I had to go back to selling gas. But as I drove away from the Sovereign Hotel, I realized something. I was not going back. I was moving forward. The $9 an hour was not a wage anymore. It was the price of admission to the boardroom. And I had just bought my ticket. The headquarters of Northbridge Rail and Ore rose from the banks of the Snake River like a tombstone made of glass and steel. It was a monolith of corporate power, casting a long, cold shadow over the town of Hollow Creek. Inside, the lobby was a cavern of Italian marble and silence, smelling of lemon polish and old money. Portraits of dead men, my ancestors, though I felt no connection to them, lined the walls in gilded frames. They all had the same steel-gray eyes as August. They all looked down at me with stern disapproval. I walked across the echoing floor flanked by August and Morgan. I was wearing the same charcoal thrift store suit I had worn to the disastrous lunch at the Marigold Room. I had tried to steam out the wrinkles in my bathroom that morning, but next to the sleek, tailored perfection of the environment, I still felt like an imposter. I felt like the gas station clerk who had wandered into the wrong movie. But then I felt the weight of the plastic key card in my pocket. I felt the heavy iron key from the storage unit, and I remembered the wall of evidence in Morgan's basement. We took the private elevator to the top floor. The doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a reception area that cost more than the entire Starlight franchise. The boardroom was behind double mahogany doors. We did not knock. August simply pushed them open. The room was massive. One wall was entirely glass, offering a panoramic view of the valley that the Northbridge family had carved up and sold for parts. In the center sat a table that looked long enough to land a plane on. It was made of dark, polished walnut. 7 people were seated around it. At the head of the table sat Vivian Northbridge. She looked up as we entered, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure venom. Next to her was Caleb Northbridge, a cousin I had only seen in newspaper photos. He was the vice president of operations, a man in his 40s with a weak chin and a watch that gleamed under the recessed lighting. Across from them sat Mr. Rollins, the CFO, a man who looked like he was made of dried parchment, and the company's general counsel, a slick lawyer named Sterling. There were 3 other board members, independent directors who looked uncomfortable, like they sensed a storm coming but did not know from which direction. "Father," Vivian said. Her voice was ice. "This is a closed session. Security was supposed to—" "I own security," August said. His voice was not loud, but it stopped her dead. He walked to the head of the table, opposite her. He did not sit. He gestured for me to take the empty leather chair to his right. Morgan stood behind me, placing her briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. "We are in the middle of a governance vote," Caleb sneered, looking at my cheap suit. "Does the girl need a job application?" "The janitorial staff is hired on the 2nd floor. The girl," August said, "is here to observe, Proceed with your agenda. Vivian, do not let us interrupt. Vivian glared at him, then smoothed the papers in front of her. She decided to ignore me. She decided to act as if I were a ghost. As I was saying, Vivian addressed the board, her voice regaining its corporate polish. Project Unity is the only way forward. The current structure of the foundation is archaic. We have too many restricted funds, too many outdated bylaws that hamper our agility. She tapped a thick document on the table. My proposal is simple. We dissolve the 1994 Family Trust. We merge all assets, the railway dividends, the ore royalties, and the charitable endowment into a single entity, Northbridge Global. This will allow us to streamline operations. It will allow us to cut costs. She paused, her eyes flickering toward me for a microsecond. Specifically, we can eliminate the administrative burden of legacy cases. We have been spending too much on beneficiaries who have no active relationship with the family. It is time to cut the dead weight and focus on high-impact philanthropy. High impact, August repeated. You mean high visibility? I mean efficiency, Vivian snapped. Mr. Sterling, please read the summary of the bylaw changes. Sterling, the lawyer, cleared his throat. He picked up a summary sheet. The motion calls for the revocation of clauses 1 through 12 of the original charter, replacing them with a centralized board structure. This includes the removal of the founder's veto and the elimination of all dormant proxy clauses. He started to move to the next page. Stop, August said. Sterling froze. Sir, you skipped something, August said. You glossed over the dormant proxy clauses. Specifically, Clause 11.4. Read it to the board. The full text. Sterling looked at Vivian. Vivian gave a barely perceptible shake of her head. It is standard boilerplate. August, Vivian said. It is irrelevant legal jargon from 20 years ago. Read it, August commanded. He slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked like a whip. Page 47, Section 11. Read it. Sterling, or you can pack your desk. Sterling swallowed hard. He flipped through the heavy binder in front of him. His fingers found the page. Clause 11.4, Sterling read, his voice monotone. The forgotten heir proxy, in the event of a governance dispute or a motion to dissolve the trust, if a direct lineal descendant of the founder, previously believed deceased or incapacitated, is identified as living. The room went very quiet. The independent directors shifted in their seats, looking from August to me. And if said descendant has maintained independent residence and employment for a continuous period of no less than 6 months, receiving no financial assistance, loans, or gifts from the trust or the family. Sterling paused to take a breath. Then said descendant shall be granted the founder's full proxy vote on all matters, superseding the board of directors, until such time as the founder revokes the privilege. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Vivian let out a short, sharp laugh. It sounded jagged. This is ridiculous, she said. Even if that silly clause exists, it does not apply here. Look at her. She pointed a manicured finger at me. She works at a convenience store. August. She makes minimum wage. That is not independent. The clause implies financial stability. It implies a career. It implies that she is one of us. She turned to the board, smiling confidently. The spirit of the law is clear. Independent means substantial means. It means she does not need money, this girl. She is a cashier. She is practically destitute. If she is eating ramen noodles, she is not independent. She is struggling, and struggling people are easily manipulated. Sterling looked uncomfortable. Well, Ms. Northbridge, technically. Technically what? Vivian snapped. The text, Sterling said, looking at the document. It does not quantify the income. It does not say substantial. It does not say wealthy. It just says income, and it says clearly, not from us. Morgan stepped forward. She opened her briefcase. She pulled out a thin blue folder and slid it down the long table. It spun across the polished wood and came to a stop right in front of the independent directors. Members of the board, Morgan said, her voice projecting like she was in a courtroom. Inside that folder, you will find notarized pay stubs from the Starlight 24 gas station. They cover the last 26 weeks, continuous, uninterrupted. She pulled out a second document. You will also find a sworn affidavit from Mr. Douglas Miller, the manager of said establishment. He attests that Elise Ramirez has worked 40 hours a week, every week, for 6 months. She worked Thanksgiving. She worked Christmas Eve while this board was enjoying the gala. She has not missed a shift. Morgan looked at Vivian. She pays her own rent. She pays her own electric bill. She buys her own food. She has not taken one dime from the Northbridge accounts. In fact, we have proof she rejected a $5,000 monthly bribe from the chairwoman last week. Vivian went pale. That was a family gift. It was charity. It was an attempt to break the chain of independence, Morgan countered. And it failed? Caleb leaned forward. His face flushed. This is absurd. We are a billion-dollar company. We are not going to let a gas station attendant decide our future based on a technicality. It is not a technicality, I said. My voice was shaking. Just a little, but I forced it to steady. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. But I locked my knees. I looked at the men in the suits. I looked at the portraits on the walls. It is not a technicality, I repeated. It is a test, and you all failed it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the black USB drive that I had found in the storage unit. I walked over to the wall-mounted control panel for the massive screen at the end of the room. I plugged it in. You say I am not one of you, I said, turning to face them. You say I do not belong at this table. You are right. I do not. I belong in the kitchen, because that is where you put me. I hit the play button. The screen flared to life. It was a montage. Eli had done his work well. The first image was the Thanksgiving dinner from 20 years ago. The table was groaning with food. The empty chair was highlighted with a red circle. And in the background, blurry but unmistakable, was me, a little girl in a gray uniform, scraping plates into a bin. Then came the audio. It was crackly, recorded on an old device, but the voice was clear. It was Rhonda Keller's voice, speaking to a staff member. Do not let her sit down. Brenda, Elise is the story, not the guest. If the donors see her eating, they think we have enough money. Keep her in the kitchen. People like to see a child who knows her place. It makes them feel generous. A gasp went through the room. One of the independent directors, a woman named Mrs. Higgins, covered her mouth with her hand. The video shifted. Christmas. Another empty chair. Another caption, every child has a seat. Then another audio clip. This one was Vivian. We need to increase the stipend request. Tell the auditors that Elise has special needs. Tell them she needs 24-hour monitoring. It justifies the salary bump for the administrative team. Just make sure she does not actually get any therapy. If she gets better, the funding stops. The video ended on a freeze frame of the brochure my face, digitally darkened to look sadder, with the words, Orphan Without a Home stamped across it. I pulled the USB drive out. The screen went black. The room was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Mr. Rollins, the CFO, looked like he was going to be sick. He was looking at Vivian not as a colleague, but as a radioactive liability. That, Rollins stammered, that is fraud. That is solicitation fraud. If the donors see that, they will sue, Morgan said, and the Attorney General will indict. August stood up. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He placed it on the table. This is my formal declaration, August said. I am invoking Clause 11.4. Effective immediately. I am transferring my proxy vote, which constitutes 51% of the voting shares of this trust, to Elise Ramirez. He looked at me. The floor is yours. Elise? I looked at the paper. I looked at Vivian. She was not smug anymore. She was small. She was terrified. She was looking at me the way Doug looked at corporate, with the realization that she was no longer the predator. I took a breath. The air in the room smelled different now. It did not smell like money. It smelled like fear. "I did not come here to beg," I said. My voice was strong now. It filled the room. "I did not come here to ask for a job, and I certainly did not come here to ask for a seat at your gala." I walked back to the table. I put my hands on the leather back of the empty chair next to August. "I came here to ask one question. How much money have you spent in the last 30 years on the poor orphan without ever once checking to see if she actually had a chair?" I looked at Mr. Rollins. "How much?" "Millions," he whispered. "And where did it go?" I asked. "Because I slept on a mattress with springs poking through it. I ate oatmeal with water. So where is it?" Nobody answered. "That is what I thought," I said. I sat down. I pulled the agenda toward me. "I am calling for a vote," I said. "Motion number 1, the immediate suspension of Vivian Northbridge and Caleb Northbridge from all executive and board positions, pending a forensic audit." "You cannot do that," Caleb shouted, standing up. "This is my company." "Sit down," August barked. "Motion number 2, I continued, ignoring him. "The immediate freezing of all foundation assets. No checks go out, no salaries, no retreats, no kitchen renovations." I looked at the independent directors. "And motion number 3, the hiring of an external, independent auditor to review every single transaction involving the Keller House and the Northbridge Family Foundation dating back to 1994. I looked at Vivian. "We are going to count every penny, and we are going to see exactly whose pocket it ended up in." I raised my hand. As the proxy for the founder, holding 51% of the vote, I vote yes. I looked at the independent directors. Mrs. Higgins looked at the video screen, then at Vivian, then at me. She slowly raised her hand. "I vote yes," she whispered. "Yes," said the man next to her. "Yes," said the third. Mr. Rollins looked at the way the wind was blowing. He raised his hand. "Yes." "Motion carried," August said. Vivian slumped back in her chair. She looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The empire she had built on my misery had just collapsed in less than 10 minutes. I looked down at my hands. They were still rough. They were still chapped, but they were the hands that had just fired my family. And for the first time, the leather of the chair felt warm. It felt like it fit. The audit report from Kendall and Rowe sat in the center of the mahogany table like a slab of concrete. It was 3 inches thick, bound in black plastic, and it contained the forensic disintegration of the Northbridge Family Foundation. The atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted. 10 days ago, it had been a battlefield. Today, it was an execution chamber. The independent directors were no longer looking at Vivian Northbridge with deference. They were looking at her with the cold, detached scrutiny one reserves for a roadkill carcass. Mr. Kendall, the lead auditor, stood at the podium. He was a small man with glasses that magnified his eyes, giving him the look of a startled owl, but his voice was lethal in its monotony. "We have traced the flow of funds designated for the Elise project over the last 18 years, Mr. Kendall stated, adjusting his tie. "The total disbursement from the main trust was $1.2 million. Of that amount, less than 4% can be verified as having been spent on the care, feeding, or education of the beneficiary, Elise Ramirez." He clicked a button on a remote. A chart appeared on the main screen. The remaining 96% was funneled through a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. He continued, "These entities, specifically Blue Horizon Consulting and VN Management, have singular signatories." He looked at Vivian. "The funds were used to purchase a vacation property in Lake Tahoe, officially listed as a staff retreat center, but occupied solely by Vivian Northbridge during the months of July and August for the last decade. They also funded the lease of a 70-foot yacht named the Sanctuary and covered the remodeling costs of 3 private residences belonging to Caleb Northbridge." Caleb, sitting next to his aunt, turned a shade of green that clashed violently with his expensive silk tie. He opened his mouth to speak, but August simply held up a hand. "We are not done," August said. Morgan Price stood up. She did not look like the paralegal from the basement anymore. She looked like the Grim Reaper in a navy blazer. She held up a single piece of paper. While Mr. Kendall was following the money, Morgan said, Eli Torres was following the data. We recovered an email thread from the internal server at the Keller house. It was deleted 3 days ago, but as Mr. Torres likes to say, nothing is ever truly deleted. She slid the paper across the table to Harold Mason, the chairman of the board. This is an exchange between Vivian Northbridge and Rhonda Keller, dated 2 days after the restraining order was issued. Harold Mason put on his reading glasses. He read the email silently. His face went pale. Then it went red. "Read it aloud, Harold," August commanded. Harold cleared his throat. His hands were shaking. "From Vivian Northbridge to Rhonda Keller," Harold read. "Subject contingency plan. Text. If the audit digs too deep and they find the death certificate issue, we push the narrative that it was a clerical error made by Dr. Vance. He is dead, so he cannot defend himself. We claim we acted in good faith based on bad paperwork." Harold paused. He looked up at Vivian with a look of pure disgust. "Keep reading," Morgan said. "And regarding Father," Harold continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, "if August continues to push this proxy nonsense, we need to trigger a health crisis. Dr. Aris owes me a favor. A heavy sedative mixed with his heart medication will mimic a stroke. If he is hospitalized, I regain power of attorney automatically. We can stop the audit before it destroys us." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy enough to crush lungs. Vivian Northbridge was not just a thief. She was a predator. She had plotted to drug her own father to cover up the theft of her niece's life. Vivian stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She looked around the room, her eyes wild, searching for an ally, a friendly face, a loophole. She found nothing but stone. "This is out of context," she stammered, her voice shrill. It was just venting. It was stress. You have to understand. I have dedicated my life to this foundation. I have sacrificed everything for this family." She turned to the independent directors, tears welling up in her eyes. It was a performance I had seen 1,000 times on the news. The weeping of a woman who had been caught. "Elise has been blinded by hate," Vivian cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She does not care about the charity. She does not care about the legacy. She just wants to hurt me. If you publish this audit, if you remove me, the donors will flee. You will destroy the reputation of the foundation. You will be taking food out of the mouths of innocent children just to satisfy the vendetta of one bitter girl." She looked at me, pleading now. "Elise, please, think of the children. Do not destroy their future just to get back at me." I sat perfectly still. I did not scream. I did not cry. I reached into my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I placed it on the table in front of me. "This is a breakdown of the food budget for the Keller house for the last fiscal year," I said. My voice was calm, steady, and cold as the Wyoming wind. "It averages out to $1.50 per meal per child." I placed a second sheet on top of it. "And this is the catering invoice for the staff retreat in Lake Tahoe last August. It averages out to $200 per plate." I looked at Vivian. "I am thinking of the children. Vivian, I am thinking that they are eating powdered potatoes while you are eating lobster funded by their misery. You are not the protector of the legacy. You are the parasite eating it from the inside out." August stood up then. He looked at his daughter with a sadness that was profound and terrible. He did not look angry anymore. He looked resigned. "Mr. Sterling," August said to the company lawyer, "please present the codicil." Sterling, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear, opened a sealed envelope. "This is a codicil to the last will and testament of August Northbridge," Sterling said. "It was filed under seal 5 years ago. It has been active, but dormant, awaiting a trigger event." He unfolded the document. The text reads, "Any trustee, board member, or beneficiary of the Northbridge Trust, who who is found to have used the assets or name of the foundation to intentionally exclude, defraud, or harm a lineal descendant of the founder, or who utilizes the narrative of said descendant's tragedy for personal financial gain, shall immediately and automatically forfeit all rights, titles, and positions within the Northbridge entities. Sterling looked up. The forfeiture is self-executing. It does not require a vote. It requires only the establishment of the fact. Harold Mason picked up the audit report. He picked up the email printout. The facts, Harold said, his voice grim, have been established. He looked at the secretary taking the minutes. Let the record show that based on the findings of the independent audit, the internal communications provided by counsel, and the video evidence presented at the previous session, Vivian Northbridge and Caleb Northbridge triggered the forfeiture clause of the codicil dating back to at least 2010. He looked at Vivian. You did not just lose your job today. Vivian, you fired yourself a decade ago. This meeting is just the paperwork catching up to your greed. Vivian collapsed into her chair. She covered her face with her hands. Caleb was staring at the table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. I move for a formal confirmation of removal, I said. I move to permanently strip Vivian Northbridge and Caleb Northbridge of all titles, access to accounts, and presence on Northbridge property. I move to initiate immediate civil proceedings to recover the $1.2 million stolen from the Elise project, plus interest. I second the motion, Harold Mason said immediately. All in favor? August asked. Every hand in the room went up. Even the lawyer raised his hand. The motion passes unanimously, August said. He then placed one final document on the table. And to ensure this never happens again, August said, I am assigning my proxy vote permanently and irrevocably to Elise Ramirez, not just for 6 months, not just while I'm alive. This proxy attaches to the trust itself. As long as the Northbridge name is on the building, Elise holds the veto power on governance and inclusion. Harold Mason nodded. It will be recorded in the minutes. I have one more policy to propose, I said. I looked around the room. The ghosts of the ancestors in the portrait seemed to be listening now. I call it the open chair policy, I said. I slid a drafted memo to the center of the table. Number 1. For the next 30 years, every event funded by this foundation, every gala, every dinner, every meeting will have a public seating chart. It will be published online 48 hours in advance. Number 2. Every beneficiary, whether they are a child in care, an alumni, or a relative, has the right to equal seating. There will be no kids' table for adults. There will be no back rooms. If you're good enough to be on the brochure, you are good enough to sit at the table. Number 3, I said, looking directly at the spot where Vivian was sobbing quietly. Any administrator found to be assigning seating based on optics or excluding a guest to the kitchen or service areas will be terminated immediately for cause. Exclusion is abuse, and we do not fund abuse. I vote yes, August said. Yes, Harold Mason said. Yes, said the board, in unison. Then it is law, August said. He pressed a button on the intercom. Send it in. The double doors at the back of the room opened. 2 maintenance workers walked in. They were carrying something heavy. It was a chair. It was a high-backed mahogany chair, upholstered in rich, dark leather. It was identical to the chairs the board members sat in, identical to the chairs at the high table of the gala. But on the back, screwed into the wood, was a shining brass plaque. The workers placed it at the head of the table, right next to August. I stood up and walked over to it. I read the inscription on the plaque. Elise Ramirez, proxy of the forgotten. I looked at Vivian. 2 security guards had entered the room and were standing behind her and Caleb. It is time to go, Aunt Viv, I said softly. You do not have a seat here anymore. Vivian stood up. She looked at me with eyes that were red and swollen, but there was no fight left in her. She looked at the chair. She looked at the plaque. She realized, finally, that the empty chair she had used to make millions had been filled by the one person she could not sell. She walked out, flanked by security. her heels clicking on the marble floor, a sound of retreat. Rhonda was waiting in the hallway, and as the doors opened, I saw her look in. She saw the chair. Her face went slack with horror. She knew what it meant. The game was over. The doors closed. The room was quiet. The air felt clean. I pulled the heavy leather chair back. It was solid. It had weight. I sat down. For the first time in my life, I was not perched on a folding stool. I was not leaning against a sink. I was not hiding in a closet. I was sitting in a chair that had been made for me, in a room where I made the rules. Morgan slid a thick file folder in front of me. "First order of business, Ms. Ramirez," she said, smiling. "The budget reallocation. Transferring the funds from the staff retreat line item to the alumni scholarship fund." I picked up the heavy, gold fountain pen that sat on the table. It felt cool against my fingers. "Start with the kids who aged out in 2010, I said. "The ones they forgot?" "Consider it done," Morgan said. I signed my name. Elise Ramirez. The ink was black and permanent. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only sound in the room. I looked around at the dark wood, the glass walls, the river flowing silently below us. This was the scene of the crime. This was where they had stolen my name and sold my sorrow. But now, it was something else. It was a workshop, and I was the mechanic. August was watching me. He did not smile, but he nodded. A slow, respectful nod. I leaned back in my chair. They told me I was an orphan. They told me I was trash. They told me I should be grateful for a bunk bed and a bowl of soup. But as I sat there, feeling the solid wood against my spine, I realized the truth. I never needed them to love me. I never needed them to claim me. All I ever needed was a chair with my name on it. The rest, I could handle myself. Thank you so much for listening to this story of justice and reclamation. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, while cooking dinner, or maybe during a late-night shift of your own? Please let me know in the comments below. And do not forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this victory with as many people as possible.